People think getting thrown out of your own home looks dramatic. Like screaming, like broken plates, like a suitcase flying down the porch steps while rain hits your face in slow motion. But what actually happened to me, what changed the shape of my life, looked like a grown man sinking deeper into a recliner, eyes glued to a football game, and saying, almost casually, "Pack your things, you're out." I'm Jess. I was 19 and I lived with my mom, Karen, 46, and her husband, Brock, 52. My stepdad, the man who waited until my mom was out of town, at a hospital, terrified for her brother after a car accident, to decide that was the perfect time to remind me I was living off his charity. He said it like I was a stray he'd fed too many times. He said the house was his. He said he paid the bills. He said my life, my school, my room, even the air I breathed in those walls was something he had allowed. And then he smiled when my calls to my mom went straight to voicemail, like he'd already arranged the world, so I couldn't reach the only person who would protect me. I still remember the feeling in my chest as I packed my clothes into trash bags, hands shaking, throat tight, trying to swallow panic so it wouldn't turn into something loud enough to make him call the police like he threatened. That night, I slept on my best friend's couch and stared at the ceiling, counting every minute my mom didn't know the truth. Because I kept thinking, what kind of man throws a teenager out at night while her mother is gone and then calls it responsibility? But here's the part that still makes my stomach twist. Brock wasn't the only person in my family who knew how to weaponize paperwork, money, and guilt. Not long after, I watched another betrayal unfold, one that had been fermenting for 25 years, where a man tried to destroy his own daughter's future just to steal the one thing his ex-wife depended on to survive. And the scariest part? Both men used the same lie. Before Brock became the man who kicked me out with a shrug, he was different. Or at least he knew how to appear different. My mom met him when I was 12, right after one of those long stretches where the house felt too quiet. My dad had left when I was 8. No dramatic explosion, just a slow fade into missed birthdays and forgotten phone calls. By the time Brock showed up, my mom was tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Back then, Brock was attentive. He took us to the movies on weekends. When I mentioned I liked reading, he surprised me with paperbacks he claimed he'd picked out himself. He laughed loudly, confidently, the kind of laugh that filled a room and made my mom smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. I wanted to like him. I really did. When they married a year and a half later, Brock moved into our house, the one my grandmother had left to my mom when she passed. It was old but solid, the kind of place where you could still feel history in the floorboards. My mom worked full-time as an office manager at a dental clinic. Brock said he worked in sales, though whenever I asked what he sold, the answer was always vague enough to end the conversation. At first, things were fine. Then the changes came slowly, quietly. Brock stopped joining us for dinner. He stopped coming to my school events. By the time I was 15, he barely spoke to me unless it was to complain about my music being too loud, about dishes left in the sink, about how much space I took up without realizing it. He spent most nights in the den, beer in hand, eyes flicking between sports and his phone. My mom made excuses for him. She said he was stressed. She said marriage took compromise. She said everyone went through phases. So I learned to move around him like he was furniture, something heavy, inconvenient, but permanent. The one thing that didn't change was my relationship with my mom. We had Thursday pizza nights whenever Brock went to his weekly poker game. We texted constantly, memes, work complaints, little observations about customers or coworkers that no one else would care about. She was my anchor. But over the last 2 years, even that began to shift. My mom got quieter. She stopped sharing details about her day. Sometimes I'd catch her staring out the kitchen window, face blank, like she'd stepped out of herself for a moment. When I asked what was wrong, she'd smile too fast and change the subject. I didn't know it then, but she was already shrinking to survive. 3 weeks before everything exploded, my mom got the call from a hospital in Springfield. Her brother had been in a car accident. He was stable, but they didn't know how serious the injuries were yet. She packed that same night. Before she left, she hugged me in the kitchen and slipped $200 into my hand for groceries and gas. She told me she'd be back in a week, maybe sooner. Brock didn't even look away from the TV when she kissed him goodbye. I remember thinking, if I ever get married, I will never accept this kind of cold. I didn't realize Brock had been waiting for this exact moment. The house felt different the moment my mom left. Not louder, not emptier, just colder. The first day passed without incident. I worked my shift at the grocery store, stocking shelves, scanning labels, letting the rhythm of routine keep my mind busy. When I got home, Brock was in his recliner like always. I made dinner, ate in my room, and didn't push conversation that wasn't being offered. The second day was the same, except longer. Someone called out sick, so I covered extra hours. On the drive home, I picked up Chinese food and left the extra cartons in the fridge, a quiet peace offering. Brock didn't acknowledge me when I walked past him, not even a glance. I told myself this was normal, temporary, that adults didn't need to talk every day to coexist. But on the third day, the tension finally broke the surface. I came home late again, my feet aching, head buzzing from fluorescent lights and endless beeping scanners. All I wanted was a shower and sleep. Instead, I walked into chaos. Empty beer bottles lined the coffee table, something my mom never allowed. The sink was piled with dishes. Her decorative throw pillows were on the floor like they'd been kicked aside. My stomach tightened. I went upstairs and stopped cold. My laundry basket was overturned in the hallway. Clean clothes scattered like debris. Some of them had shoe prints across the fabric. When I stepped into my room, my desk was cleared. My textbook stacked in a corner. The shelf that held my skincare and makeup was empty. It felt like someone had erased me. I went back downstairs, heart pounding. Brock didn't look away from the TV when I asked what happened to my things. He said I needed to learn to keep my belongings in my space instead of spreading them all over his house. I told him my desk was in my bedroom. That's when he finally looked at me. His expression wasn't angry. It was worse, amused. He said my mom hadn't explained things properly, but now that she wasn't around to baby me, it was time I understood how the world worked. He said I was an adult now, and adults didn't get free rides. Adults paid rent, bought their own food, contributed. And since I wasn't doing any of that, I was living off his charity. I reminded him quietly, carefully, that my mom owned the house. He laughed, said my mom might have her name on some papers, but he was the one paying the mortgage, the bills, everything. He asked me how I thought my mom could afford to send me to college on her salary. Then he said something that made my blood go cold. Everything you have is because I allow it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about control. And he'd been waiting for my mom to leave to take it. My hands were shaking when I pulled my phone out. I didn't say anything dramatic. I didn't scream. I just stepped back a little, like I needed space to breathe, and dialed my mom's number right there in the living room. It rang once, then went to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. The little voicemail icon stared back at me like a closed door. I texted her, "Hey, can you call me when you get this?" The message said delivered. No reply. I could feel Brock watching me now, his attention finally pulled from the TV. When I looked up, he was smiling. Not kindly, not awkwardly, confidently. He said, almost conversationally, that he'd already spoken to my mom earlier. He said he'd told her I was fine and that she didn't need to worry about anything back home. He said she had enough stress dealing with her brother in the hospital. Then he leaned forward slightly and added, "And if you try calling her again and upset her, I'll make sure she knows exactly what kind of selfish daughter she raised." The room felt smaller. I asked him what he meant by that. That's when he told me to pack my things and leave. I asked where he expected me to go. He shrugged, eyes flicking back to the screen. Said I could figure it out like any other adult. Said I had friends, didn't I? Maybe this would teach me responsibility, gratitude. I asked him, my voice barely steady, if he was serious. If he was really kicking me out while my mom was gone. Brock stood up then. He walked to the bottom of the stairs, looming in a way that made my skin crawl. He told me I had until the game ended to be out of his house. Otherwise, he'd call the police and have me removed for trespassing. Then he sat back down. Just like that, I packed in silence. 2 garbage bags, clothes thrown in without folding. Another bag for my laptop, charger, and textbooks. I grabbed my toothbrush, the $200 my mom had left me, and my car keys. I walked out at 8:15 p.m. The air outside felt unreal, too cool, too open, like I'd stepped into someone else's life by accident. I drove straight to my best friend Taylor's apartment. She opened the door in pajamas, took one look at the bags, and pulled me into a hug without asking questions. Her boyfriend, Nick, wasn't thrilled, but he didn't say anything that first night. The next morning, over coffee, Taylor told me I could stay as long as I needed. Nick kept sighing, looking at my bags. By the end of the week, it was clear I wasn't welcome long-term. I picked up extra shifts, applied to cheap room rentals, checked my phone constantly. Still nothing from my mom. On the 6th day, she finally texted, "Marcus is doing better. I'll be home tomorrow. Everything okay there?" I stared at the message for 20 minutes. Then I lied. Everything's fine. See you tomorrow. Because I wanted her to hear the truth from me, not from him. When my mom came home the next afternoon, I was standing in the driveway with 2 trash bags at my feet. Her car pulled in slowly, like she was exhausted down to her bones. When she stepped out, she smiled, soft, relieved, and reached for me before she even closed the door. Then her eyes dropped. She looked at the bags. Her smile faded, just a little. "What's that?" she asked. I told her. Not fast, not angrily. I just said the words, one after another, like if I rushed them, they might collapse. I told her Brock kicked me out the night she left, that I'd been staying on a couch, that I couldn't reach her because my calls went straight to voicemail. At first, she didn't react. She just stared at me like she was translating a language she didn't expect to hear. Then she asked me to say it again. When I finished, she set the grocery bag she was holding down on the counter with more force than necessary and walked into the living room. Brock was coming down the stairs with a coffee mug. When he saw me, he smirked and made some comment about the prodigal daughter returning. My mom turned to him and asked, very calmly, if what I said was true. He tried to deflect, said I was exaggerating, said we'd had a disagreement about house rules and that I'd chosen to leave. My mom didn't raise her voice. She asked again, yes or no? Brock said I was an adult and it was time I stopped mooching. That's when my mom told me to go upstairs. I sat on my bed with the trash bag still at my feet and listened. At first, I couldn't make out words, just the rhythm of raised voices. Then it got louder. I heard my mom say, "Never in my life." I heard Brock say something about disrespect in his house. And then my mom's voice changed. Sharp, clear. She said it wasn't his house. She said the house was paid off before Brock ever moved in, that her mother had left it to her, that there was no mortgage because there never had been one. There was a long silence. Then she told him to pack his things. She said their marriage was over. An hour later, I watched from my window as Brock loaded boxes into his truck. My mom stood on the porch, arms crossed, not saying a word. When he drove away, she came upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed. She apologized. Not with tears, just honesty. She said she should have done this years ago. Then she asked if I wanted tea. We made it together and didn't talk about him again that night. For about a week after Brock left, the house felt unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful, suspended. Like the walls were holding their breath, waiting to see if he'd come back and demand his space again. My mom went to work like nothing had changed. She woke up early, made coffee, packed her lunch. I went to my shifts at the grocery store and logged into my online classes at night. We moved around each other carefully, not because we were upset with each other, but because we were both processing the same shock from different angles. She boxed up Brock's remaining things and stacked them in the garage. She changed the locks. She called a lawyer. That call changed the tone of everything. The lawyer explained that because my mom and Brock had been married for 6 years, Brock might try to claim entitlement to certain assets, even though the house was hers before the marriage. My mom listened quietly, thanked the lawyer, and said she wanted him out of her life as quickly as possible. She didn't sound scared. She sounded done. 2 weeks later, she told me she wanted to sell the house. I asked why. She didn't hesitate. She said she couldn't live in a place where Brock had walked through every room pretending he owned it. She wanted a fresh start. Smaller, lighter, just for the two of us. We found a modest 2-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from her work and 15 from mine. It wasn't fancy, but it felt clean, neutral, untouched by Brock's voice. Moving day was exhausting and strangely emotional. My mom bought new curtains, a new coffee maker. I got a desk that actually fit my books. On our second Saturday there, we ran errands together. We were unloading groceries when Brock's truck pulled into the parking lot. My mom froze. She told me to take the bags inside. I didn't. I watched. Brock looked worse. Wrinkled clothes, unshaven, restless. He started talking fast, apologizing, saying he'd made a mistake, saying my mom needed him more than she realized. My mom let him talk. Then she said something that cracked the illusion he'd been living in. She told him she never needed him, that the house had been hers all along, that her salary paid the bills, that the only reason he'd had a roof for 6 years was because she'd allowed it. When he laughed and accused her of lying, she calmly told him about the trust fund her mother had left her and the prenup he'd signed without reading. She handed him divorce papers in the parking lot. He read them, and for the first time, he looked afraid. After that, the harassment started. Texts to me, then angry ones, then forgiving ones, new numbers, same entitlement. Then he showed up at my mom's workplace, then at our apartment. Each time, the stakes rose. The police were called. Reports were filed. Finally, a restraining order was granted. By the time it was official, I realized something important. Brock didn't miss us. He missed control. And when he lost it, he unraveled. The restraining order didn't bring relief the way I thought it would. It brought silence. And silence, when you've been living on adrenaline, can feel terrifying. For the first week after it was granted, I jumped at every sound. Every knock on the door made my heart slam into my ribs. Every time I came home from work, I scanned the parking lot for Brock's truck, half expecting it to be there despite the paper barrier a judge had put between us. He never showed up. That almost made it worse. My mom tried to act normal. She went to her yoga class on Wednesday nights. She rearranged the living room furniture. She bought plants for the windowsill and talked about how much light the apartment got in the afternoons. But at night, I'd hear her pacing. Sometimes I'd find her sitting at the kitchen table long after dinner, tea gone cold in her mug, staring at nothing. She didn't cry. She just looked hollowed out, like someone who'd finally put down a weight they'd been carrying for years, only to realize they didn't know how to stand without it yet. I felt guilty in ways I couldn't fully explain. If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't told her, if Brock hadn't targeted me, I knew logically it wasn't my fault. My mom told me that over and over. But guilt doesn't care about logic. It whispers anyway. 2 weeks later, a coworker mentioned seeing Brock at a gas station across town, said he looked like he'd been sleeping in his truck. I pretended not to care. But that night, I dreamed about him standing outside our door, knocking softly instead of pounding, calling my name like I owed him something. That was my lowest point, not fear, but confusion. Because some part of me still wanted this to make sense, still wanted to believe there was a version of Brock who hadn't meant to hurt us this badly. Then my dad called. I hadn't heard his voice in over a year. He lives in another state now with his new family. When I was younger, he called sometimes, then less, then barely at all. The last time we spoke, he forgot my birthday. He said he'd been thinking about me. I didn't tell him about Brock at first. We talked about school, about work, about nothing important. Then he asked how my mom was doing, and the truth spilled out. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said he was coming to visit. I told him we were fine. He said he'd already booked the flight. That visit stirred everything up again. Old abandonment, old anger, old questions about who actually shows up when things fall apart. Watching my parents in the same room again was awkward and heavy, like history pressing in from all sides. But when my dad confronted Brock without telling us first, and came back saying, "He won't bother you anymore," something inside me finally cracked. Not relief, realization. I couldn't keep waiting for men to fix the messes they helped create. I couldn't keep measuring safety by someone else's presence. That night, sitting on my bed, listening to my mom move around the kitchen, I understood something I hadn't before. The darkest part wasn't being kicked out. It was realizing how many adults in my life had failed to protect us, and how long we'd survived anyway. The real shift didn't happen with raised voices or dramatic confrontations. It happened quietly, on an ordinary Tuesday night. My mom and I were sitting at the kitchen table, paperwork spread out between us. Legal documents, school forms, bills, the unglamorous remains of rebuilding a life. She was showing me where she kept important files now, explaining things she'd never explained before. Not because she expected something bad to happen, but because she didn't want me in the dark ever again. At one point, she paused and said something that stopped me cold. "I spent years thinking I was protecting you by keeping things calm," she said, eyes fixed on the table. "But all I was really doing was teaching you to tolerate being disrespected." That was the moment everything snapped into focus. It wasn't just Brock. It was the pattern. Men who took up space and called it contribution. Men who framed control as care. Men who rewrote reality until you doubted your own memory. My dad had done it by disappearing and assuming my mom would handle everything. Brock had done it by staying and convincing us we owed him for existing. Different methods, same result. That night, my mom told me about the trust fund in more detail, how her mother had insisted it stay separate, how she'd signed the prenup. Not because she didn't believe in marriage, but because she believed in protecting herself. "I ignored my instincts once," she said. "I won't do it again." Neither would I. A few days later, Brock tried one last time. A new number, a long message, apologetic, soft, carefully worded. He said he was lonely. He said he missed being a family. He said he just wanted closure. I read it once. Then I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my mom and her lawyer, blocked the number, and went back to my homework. That was my turning point. Not responding didn't feel cruel. It felt final. Around the same time, Brock's sister called my mom. She apologized for her brother's behavior, told her this wasn't new, that he'd lost jobs over harassment, burned bridges everywhere he went, refused help every time it was offered. Hearing that didn't make me angry. It made me calm. because it confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't stress. It wasn't something we could have fixed by being quieter, nicer, or more grateful. Brock was exactly who he'd always been. We just stopped enabling him. That realization gave me something I hadn't had before: clarity. I wasn't a burden. My mom wasn't weak. We weren't ungrateful or dramatic or selfish. We were women who had been accommodating someone else's entitlement for too long. And we were done. The consequences didn't come all at once. They never do. They arrived slowly, methodically, like gravity finally remembering it exists. The restraining order changed the power dynamic overnight. Brock could no longer show up unannounced. He couldn't call, text, or just explain himself. Every attempt to reach us became documented evidence instead of emotional leverage. And without access to us, his world started collapsing in ways he couldn't talk his way out of. His sister called my mom again a few weeks later. This time, her voice sounded tired. She said Brock had moved out of state to stay with a friend, that he'd burned through most of the goodwill he had left, that people were done picking up after him. She didn't ask us to forgive him. She just wanted us to know he wouldn't be coming back. That was the first real consequence. The second was quieter. My mom's lawyer finalized the divorce. Brock signed the papers without contest once he fully understood the prenup meant he wasn't getting the house, the trust fund, or a financial lifeline. 6 years of marriage ended in a few signatures and a manila envelope. No grand speech, no apology, just paperwork. After it was done, my mom seemed lighter. Not happy, not healed, but no longer braced for impact. She stopped flinching when her phone buzzed. She started sleeping through the night. She signed up for yoga on Wednesdays and actually went. She laughed, softly at first, then more easily. Brock tried to reclaim relevance one last way. He left me a voicemail from a blocked number, rambling, defensive, angry. He said the case was over now and we should move forward. He said family didn't abandon each other like this. He said he wanted to see me again, like that was a reasonable request after everything he'd done. I deleted it. That was the moment I realized something important. When people lose control, they often mistake access for forgiveness. Brock lost both. And without us to dominate, there was nothing left to prop him up. Meanwhile, our life continued. We unpacked groceries in our small kitchen. We argued about what to watch on TV. I complained about work. My mom complained about patients who showed up late and expected miracles. Normal things. The kind of normal that had been impossible when Brock was around. I stopped checking the parking lot for his truck. My mom stopped checking the locks twice. We didn't celebrate his downfall. We didn't gloat. We didn't talk about him much at all. That, more than anything, was the fallout he couldn't stand. Because Brock didn't just lose a house. He lost relevance. And the truth he'd spent years denying, that he'd never been the provider, the protector, or the authority he claimed to be, had finally caught up to him. He wasn't exposed by revenge. He was exposed by absence. There was no dramatic ending. No confrontation in a courtroom. No final message that tied everything up neatly. No moment where Brock suddenly understood what he'd done and apologized in a way that fixed anything. What we got instead was something quieter. Peace. Weeks passed. Then months. Brock didn't contact us again. His name stopped coming up in conversations. The apartment started to feel like ours. Not a temporary shelter, not a place we were hiding, but a home built intentionally, without fear. My mom seemed calmer, lighter, like someone who'd finally stopped bracing for disappointment. She still went to yoga on Wednesdays. She started redecorating slowly, choosing things because she liked them, not because they were neutral enough to avoid an argument. I kept working. I finished my classes. I stopped measuring my worth by how little space I took up. That was the real lesson in all of this. Not that some people are cruel, but that cruelty often hides behind entitlement, and entitlement survives on silence. Brock didn't lose us because he made a mistake. He lost us because he believed love meant ownership, because he believed generosity could be claimed retroactively, because he thought control was something you could disguise as responsibility. He was wrong. What my mom taught me, without meaning to, was that strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like changing the locks, like reading contracts, like choosing not to respond, like making tea and sitting at a kitchen table until it goes cold, because you're finally safe enough to sit still. We didn't get revenge. We got something better. A life where no one gets to tell us we owe them for existing. And that's enough.